Did you know every winter, across the United States, a silent danger lurks for many? Thousands of bikers are stranded on remote highways, caught off guard by sudden snowstorms and plummeting temperatures. These unexpected weather events quickly turn treacherous, leaving many riders facing life-threatening conditions. With roads impassable and visibility near zero, they often have nowhere safe to go, battling the elements alone. But imagine a different scenario. What happens when cold, shivering bikers, desperate for shelter, knock on an elderly widow's door? In that pivotal moment, she faces a profound decision, a choice that will not only offer them refuge, but also irrevocably change her own life forever. Nestled deep in the rolling hills of the countryside, far from the noise of city life, stood a modest little cottage with ivy creeping up its stone walls and a chimney that puffed gentle clouds of smoke into the winter sky. This was the home of Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore, a 72-year-old widow whose days passed quietly, marked by the rhythm of tea kettles whistling and the soft ticking of a grandfather clock in the hallway. Eleanor had lived alone since her husband, Harold, passed away nearly a decade ago. Their love had been the kind that lingered in the air long after he was gone, woven into the fabric of the home they built together. The cottage, though small, radiated warmth. Hand-knitted blankets draped over the armchairs, each stitch a memory. The scent of fresh bread often floated through the rooms, mingling with the faint aroma of lavender from the sachets she tucked into drawers. On the windowsill, an old oil lamp flickered gently, casting golden light onto the snow-covered porch like a beacon of comfort in the cold. Outside, winter had arrived with full force. Snowflakes danced furiously in the wind, piling high against fences and burying the narrow country road that led to Eleanor's home. The trees groaned under the weight of ice, and the wind howled like a distant train, rattling the shutters and whispering through the cracks in the walls. But inside, Eleanor sat in her rocking chair, wrapped in a shawl, reading a worn copy of Little Women for the 100th time. Her cat, Marbles, curled up beside her, purred softly as the fire crackled in the hearth. She had no visitors that day, no phone calls, no letters, just the quiet companionship of memory and routine. And yet, despite the solitude, Eleanor never felt bitter. She believed in kindness, in the small joys of life, a warm meal, a good book, a gentle snowfall. As the evening deepened and the storm outside grew fiercer, Eleanor stood to refill her teacup, humming an old tune under her breath. She glanced out the frosted window, expecting nothing more than the usual blanket of white. But then 3 sharp knocks echoed through the cottage. Startled, she paused. Visitors were rare, especially in weather like this. She shuffled to the door, heart fluttering with curiosity and concern. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly imagine, was that this unexpected knock would lead to the most extraordinary morning of her life, a moment that would transform her quiet world into something vibrant, unforgettable, and deeply human. Outside Eleanor's cottage, the storm had transformed into a merciless force of nature. What began as gentle snowfall had escalated into a blizzard of blinding fury. The wind screamed across the open fields, bending trees and rattling rooftops. Snowdrifts swallowed the roads whole, erasing tire tracks and landmarks, turning the countryside into a white void. Visibility was reduced to mere feet. The temperature had plunged so low that even breath turned to ice in the air. It was the kind of night that made headlines, the kind that stranded travelers, froze engines, and tested the limits of human endurance. Miles away from the nearest town, a group of bikers, 5 men and 2 women, were caught in the chaos. They had been riding together for days, a tight-knit crew bonded by the road, by stories shared over campfires and the roar of engines beneath them. But tonight, the road had betrayed them. Their bikes, sleek and powerful, were no match for the snow-covered terrain. Their leather jackets, once symbols of freedom and grit, now clung to their bodies like icy traps. Snow clung to their eyelashes. Their fingers, stiff and pale, barely gripped the handlebars. Every gust of wind felt like a slap. Every minute outside was a battle against frostbite. They had tried everything, calling motels, checking GPS for shelters, even knocking on a few darkened doors, but the storm had shut everything down. No lights, no signs of life, just endless white and the growing fear that they might not make it through the night. Then, through the swirling snow, one of them spotted it, a faint glow in the distance, a single flickering light. It was dim, barely visible, but it was enough. They revved their engines and followed it, hearts pounding, hope flickering like the lamp they chased. As they drew closer, the shape of a small cottage emerged from the storm. Smoke curled from the chimney. A warm amber light spilled from the window. It looked like something out of a painting, impossibly serene in the chaos. They parked their bikes, stumbled through knee-deep snow, and approached the door. Their boots thudded against the wooden porch. One of them raised a trembling hand and knocked. Inside, Eleanor stirred. Outside, 7 strangers stood on the edge of survival, praying that someone, anyone, would answer. Eleanor had grown accustomed to silence, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that echoes through empty rooms and lingers in the corners of memory. Since Harold's passing, winters had stretched longer, their chill not just in the air but in the absence of shared conversation, of footsteps beside hers, of someone to say goodnight. The cottage, once filled with the hum of companionship, had become a quiet sanctuary, gentle, yes, but undeniably lonely. Still, Eleanor never let her heart grow cold. She kept the fire burning, both in the hearth and within herself. She baked bread not just for sustenance, but for the comfort of routine. She knitted blankets not just to stay warm, but to feel the rhythm of creation. Her kindness was not performative, it was instinctive, stitched into her very being. So when she opened the door that stormy night and saw 7 strangers, faces red from windburn, hands trembling, eyes pleading, she didn't flinch. She didn't ask questions. She simply stepped aside and said, "Come in, quickly." The bikers hesitated for a moment, surprised by the softness in her voice. They were used to suspicion, to doors slammed shut, to people judging them by the ink on their skin or the roar of their engines. But Eleanor saw something else, human beings in need. Inside, the warmth enveloped them like a blanket. Eleanor moved with quiet urgency, pulling out extra quilts from the linen chest, setting a kettle on the stove, and ladling out bowls of leftover beef stew that had been simmering in her pantry. The aroma of thyme and garlic filled the room, mingling with the scent of wet leather and snow. One of the bikers, a burly man named Vince with a dragon tattoo curling around his neck, looked down at the floral teacup Eleanor handed him and chuckled. "Haven't held one of these since my grandma passed," he said softly. Another, a woman named Rosa, with wind-chapped cheeks and a streak of silver in her hair, wrapped herself in a knitted blanket and whispered, "This feels like home." The transformation was quiet but profound. The tough exteriors began to melt. Laughter, hesitant at first, bubbled up. Stories were shared, of road trips gone wrong, of childhood memories, of dreams still waiting to be chased. Eleanor listened, her eyes twinkling, occasionally chiming in with tales of Harold and the adventures they once had. For the first time in days, the bikers felt safe. And for the first time in years, Eleanor's cottage was alive, with voices, with warmth, with the kind of connection that only emerges when strangers become something more. It wasn't just shelter, it was grace, and it was just the beginning. Morning arrived quietly, as if the storm had never happened. The blizzard had passed in the night, leaving behind a world blanketed in pristine white. Snow clung to the trees like lace, and the sun, low on the horizon, cast a golden hue across the countryside. Inside the cottage, Eleanor stirred beneath her quilt, the warmth of the previous night still lingering in the air, not just from the fire, but from the presence of the 7 bikers who had filled her home with laughter, stories, and life. She expected the morning to be simple. A few thank yous, perhaps a handshake or two. Maybe a photo taken on a phone, a memory to carry with them on the road. She imagined they'd be gone before breakfast, engines roaring off into the distance, leaving behind only the echo of their gratitude. But when Eleanor shuffled to the window and pulled back the curtain, what she saw made her breath catch in her throat. There, parked neatly in a row, were the motorcycles, gleaming in the morning light, their chrome glinting like silver against the snow. But that wasn't what made her gasp. Her porch, which had always been a challenge to climb with her aching knees, now had a brand new ramp, sturdy, smooth, and thoughtfully designed. It curved gently from the snow-cleared path to her front door, complete with handrails and non-slip grips. Just beside it, stacked with care, were bags of groceries, fresh produce, canned goods, even a few treats she hadn't bought in years. And beyond that, her old wooden fence, which had been leaning precariously for months, was now standing tall and straight, every plank replaced, every nail hammered in with precision. Eleanor blinked, unsure if she was dreaming. She opened the door slowly, the cold air brushing against her cheeks, and stepped outside. Her slippers sank slightly into the snow, but she barely noticed. Her eyes scanned the scene, heart thudding in her chest. The bikers were gathered near the edge of the property, sipping coffee from mismatched mugs, their breath visible in the crisp air. They turned as she approached, smiles spreading across their faces. "Morning, sunshine," Vince said, his voice warm and gravelly. "Hope we didn't wake you." Eleanor's voice trembled. What have you done?" Rosa stepped forward, her eyes soft. "We noticed a few things last night, the porch steps, the fence, the pantry. You've been managing alone, but it shouldn't be that hard." "We couldn't just leave," added Marcus, the youngest of the group, his hands still smudged with paint. "Not after what you did for us." Eleanor looked at each of them, her vision blurring with tears. "You stayed up all night?" "Pretty much," Vince chuckled. "We're used to working late, and we had help. Your stew gave us enough fuel to keep going." They had used what they had, tools from their saddlebags, scraps of wood from the shed, even borrowed nails from Eleanor's old toolbox. They had worked in shifts, some repairing the fence, others building the ramp, and one brave soul trudging through the snow to a nearby store that had just reopened to buy groceries. It wasn't just a gesture, it was a transformation. Eleanor covered her mouth, overwhelmed. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Rosa said gently. "You saved us last night. We just wanted to make sure your mornings are easier from now on." One by one, they approached her. Vince gave her a bear hug, careful not to squeeze too tight. Rosa kissed her on the cheek. Marcus handed her a small wooden carving he'd made from a broken fence post, a heart with wings etched into it. "For your mantle," he said shyly. Eleanor held it close, her fingers trembling. "You're not just bikers," she whispered. "You're angels." They laughed, brushing off the compliment, but the truth hung in the air. In a world that often judged by appearances, these leather-clad strangers had shown a depth of compassion that defied stereotypes. Before they left, they gathered in a circle around Eleanor. Vince spoke for them all. "We ride a lot, we see a lot, but last night that was different. You reminded us what it means to be human." Eleanor nodded, tears streaming freely now. "And you reminded me what it means to be seen." The engines roared to life, but the goodbye was slow, tender. Hugs were exchanged. Promises to return were made. And as the motorcycles disappeared down the snowy road, Eleanor stood on her new ramp, heart full, watching them go. She didn't feel alone anymore. Inside, the cottage was still warm. The blankets still smelled of lavender. But now there was something new, a sense of connection, a reminder that kindness, even in the smallest form, can ripple outward and return in ways we never expect. It wasn't just about groceries or repairs. It was about dignity, about love, about the miracle of strangers becoming family in the span of a single night. And as the sun climbed higher, casting light on the ramp, the fence, and the heart-shaped carving on her mantel, Eleanor whispered to herself, Harold would have loved them. That night, Eleanor hadn't paused to weigh the risks. She hadn't asked for names, credentials, or explanations. She had simply opened her door, not out of obligation, but out of instinct, an unspoken belief that no one should face the cold alone. In a world that often teaches us to guard our hearts, Eleanor had chosen compassion. And that choice, made in a moment of quiet courage, would ripple far beyond anything she could have imagined. By morning, her home stood transformed, not just physically, but spiritually. The ramp outside her door was more than a convenience. It was a symbol of care. The repaired fence wasn't just wood and nails. It was a gesture of protection. And the bags of groceries, stacked with intention and generosity, spoke of a shared humanity that transcended appearances, backgrounds, and circumstance. The bikers didn't leave with fanfare. There were no speeches, no dramatic farewells, just warm hugs, heartfelt smiles, and the kind of eye contact that says, "You matter." As their engines roared to life and they disappeared down the snowy road, Eleanor stood on her new porch, watching them go, not with sadness, but with a quiet joy that filled her chest like sunlight. Her pantry was full. Her home was stronger, but more than anything, her heart was overflowing, with gratitude, with awe, with the realization that kindness, when given freely, has a way of returning in forms we never expect. She walked back inside, the warmth of the cottage wrapping around her like an old friend. The oil lamp still flickered on the windowsill. Marbles, her cat, curled up beside the hearth. But something had shifted. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt peaceful. The solitude no longer felt lonely. It felt earned. Eleanor sat in her rocking chair, the wooden heart carving resting gently in her lap. She traced its edges with her fingers, thinking of Vince, Rosa, Marcus, and the others, strangers who had arrived in desperation and left as family. And in that quiet moment, she understood something profound, that sometimes the most extraordinary blessings come not from planning or pursuit, but from a simple act of opening one's door. Helping strangers in need hadn't just saved their lives, it had revived her own. It had reminded her that love doesn't always arrive in familiar forms. Sometimes it wears leather jackets, rides motorcycles, and builds ramps in the middle of the night. And sometimes all it takes to change a life is a knock on the door. If this story warmed your heart even just a little, then you're exactly where you need to be. Ruth Grandma's YouTube channel is a place where real stories, like Eleanor's, come to life. Stories of kindness, courage, and unexpected miracles. Stories that remind us that even in the coldest moments, compassion can light the way. So if you believe in the power of human connection, if you've ever opened your door to someone in need or wished someone had opened theirs to you, then go ahead and hit that subscribe button. You'll be joining a growing community of people who believe that empathy still matters and that love, quiet, generous, and unconditional, can change lives. We'd love to hear from you. Share your own experience of kindness in the comments below. Maybe it was a stranger who helped you on a rainy day. Maybe it was a neighbor who showed up when you least expected it. Or maybe you were the one who gave someone hope. Whatever your story is, it matters. And we're listening. When you're done, don't forget to check the link in the description. There's another heartwarming story waiting for you, one that will lift your spirits and remind you that goodness is still out there, often in the most surprising places.